Now we want to call Joseph up and going to give him some questions here. So besides that outline, another thing to keep in mind is these question sheets. Now you don't have to have these if you just want to rip off a piece of paper. That works too, but remember to turn these in if you have questions. All right, so first question. Are we living in the time of the fourth kingdom?
Okay, so I think this question was relating to both Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. Both picture four kingdoms, but then after the fourth kingdom, it divides with the image in Daniel 2. There's the head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, that's the fourth kingdom, and then has feet of iron and clay, kind of a division of the fourth kingdom. Then Daniel 7 has a lion, a bear, a leopard, a terrible beast, and this terrible beast has 10 horns. Again, signifying the same things, and the horns are then the division of the kingdom. So I would say not exactly living in the fourth kingdom, we're more like living after it's been divided. But you could somewhat say it's under the fourth kingdom. So yes.
The influence is still there.
Yeah, the influence is still there. So yeah, there's still some influence from the fourth kingdom, yeah.
Okay, so this one's a question about Egypt. Why was Egypt said or mentioned in the bear and the leopard?
All right, so I think what's being asked in this question, if I'm understanding it correctly, is when we talked about both Medo-Persia and when we talked about Greece. Medo-Persia, it said, conquered three kingdoms, and one of them was Egypt. And then when Greece, it divided into four divisions, and one of them was listed in the territory of Egypt. So Egypt was a territory in that area. For a while it was a kingdom prior to that, but at this point it became, it was a territory that was conquered, and then one of the generals was over that territory. So I think that answers the question, if I understood it correctly.
Okay, so this one's about Satan.
Okay.
Why was Satan sent to this earth only? Explain the significance of standing in the heavens and the sanctuary.
I think those are two different questions.
All right.
So the first question, why was Satan sent to this earth only? That would be, I would argue he probably wasn't just sent to earth. As we alluded to in a previous night, on our second night, that there were other worlds created, and I would say he probably had somewhat access to them like he had here with the serpent. Now, we're not given a lot of information about them, but from what we can tell from both the parables of Christ and everything else that we can read about, we were the only ones who chose to follow him. So then that's why he's pretty much here only now, because these are the people who followed him.
What parable are you referring to?
The parable of the lost lamb. The lamb that's lost, and then all the 99 aren't lost. All the 99 are the worlds that followed God. So yeah.
Okay, so let's go to that second question. So explain the significance of standing in the heavens and sanctuary. Okay,
so I mentioned this in our third night when we talked about when we talked about Jesus standing at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens at the time of the stoning of Stephen. There's only one other time that I can think of right now. There might be another, but only one other time I can think of that it refers to Jesus standing up in the heavens. And that is in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 1. He stands up. And as we read in Isaiah chapter 3 and verse 13, the Lord stands to judge the people. So he's kind of standing in a type of judgment. And in 34 AD at the stoning of Stephen, that was kind of the end of the probationary period for the Jewish nation. He was pronouncing a judgment on them. And then in Daniel 12 and verse 1, which we'll kind of get to later in the series, is kind of the end of the world, pronouncing judgment on the world.
Okay, so last question. Why does God have a heavenly sanctuary?
Why does God have a heavenly sanctuary? I think that one we're going to spend a whole meeting talking about the heavenly sanctuary on a little more than a week. So I think that would probably be best answered after we go through that. We'll hopefully explain it in that series when we have the full time to develop it. And if it's still not explained, I would say submit the question again, and if it doesn't explain fully.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good evening. Good to see you guys back here. Didn't have the storms we had last night, so hopefully you guys were able to find your way back. It's good to be with you guys again. That was a good song, guys. That was powerful. So we're going to be discussing tonight. We're continuing our series, Revelation Speaks Hope, the Lamb-like Beast. Revelation's Lamb-like Beast. Revelation speaks hope. So we're continuing our series on the book of Revelation. We've been continuing our series through Revelation chapter 12, and now we're into Revelation 13. So we've identified the first beast of Revelation 13. This is what we did last night. We took Revelation 13 and we studied it. And we saw that there were multiple allusions back to what chapter of the book of Daniel? Do you remember? Daniel 7, okay? We had multiple allusions back to Daniel chapter 7. And then we studied Daniel chapter 7 to identify this beast power, this Antichrist power, or the little horn as it's referred to in Daniel 7. It's all referring to the same power. We'll just review that briefly for those of you who weren't here last night. If you weren't here last night, it's really important to kind of understand that, to understand this one. So if you weren't here, try to watch the sermon online or loan one of the DVDs. But we studied Daniel 7, and Daniel 7 runs parallel to Daniel chapter 2. So in Daniel chapter 2, we have the image with the various metals all the way through. And in Daniel chapter 7, we have beasts, 4 great beasts. And they run exactly parallel. The first kingdom is the kingdom of Babylon, represented by the head of gold and by a lion with eagle's wings. The second kingdom is the kingdom of Medo-Persia, represented by the belly and thighs, or the arms, chest and arms of silver, and by the bear, raised up on one side with 3 ribs in its mouth. Then the next one is Greece, represented by the belly and thighs of brass, and the leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings. The next kingdom, represented by the legs of iron and by this nondescript beast, here looking like a Tyrannosaurus Rex, representing Rome from 168 BC to 476 AD. Then after that comes the division of the Roman Empire into the 10 kingdoms, represented by the feet of iron and clay and the 10 horns on the beast. The 10 horns on the beast. Then after these 10 horns comes up a little horn. And quite a bit of the message of Daniel chapter 7 is talking about this little horn beast, or this little horn power. And it spends quite a bit of time outlining what this little horn power is and who this little horn power is. This is what's commonly referred to as the Antichrist. And we picked out 8 observations, and then we compared them with history and how the rest of the prophecy has to fit, as well as the rest of the Bible. And these were the 8 identifying marks of this power, the 8 identifying marks of this power. We saw that it would come from Rome or be Roman in some way. It would arise after 476 AD. When the other horns arose, it was said to come up after the other horns. Number 3, it would begin as a small, unimportant kingdom. It was a little horn and become very powerful. Number 4, it would rise to power between 493 and 538 AD. Number 5, it would be proud in relation to God. Number 6, it would be a persecuting power. Number 7, it would try to change the very laws and times of God. And finally, number 8, it would rule and persecute for 1,260 years. For 1,260 years. Now, we examined what people have identified this little horn power as. People have identified it as various different things. They've talked about Antiochus Epiphanes, we talked about last night. They also talked about the Barack Obama. You can talk about Adolf Hitler. There's all of these, but when we examined all of the evidence, only one power actually fit all of these identifying marks. Only one power fit all of these identifying marks. And it was the Roman Catholic power. The Roman Catholic power. Now, I just want to reiterate what I said last night, is we're not talking about the people. There are very good, devout Catholics who are trying to serve God as best as they know how. Okay? We're talking about the system, how the devil is using the system. I just want to reiterate that. Now, we'll just go through these and briefly explain how they were fulfilled. It comes from Rome or is Roman in some way. It's Roman Catholic. That's self-explanatory. It arises after 476 A.D. It came to power in 538 A.D. It would begin as a small, unimportant kingdom and become very powerful. It controlled the vast majority of Europe for many years. It would rise to power between 493 and 538 A.D. It did. As we said, it reached the height of its power in 538 A.D. Number 5, it would be proud in relation to God. We read many quotes last night. We'll read some more tonight as well as we continue of it being proud in relation to God. It would be a persecuting power. The history speaks for itself. There was quite a bit of persecutions during the Dark Ages. Number 7, it would try to change the laws and times of God. We examined this, and we'll examine it some more in future nights. But we saw how in the modern catechism as well as the ancient catechism, the 10 commandments have been altered considerably. The second commandment was taken out. The 10th commandment was split in two. And the fourth commandment was shortened and changed considerably. And it would rule and persecute for 1,260 years. As we mentioned earlier, it came to power in 538 A.D., and it received a deadly wound, which we'll talk about a bit more today, in 1798, exactly 1,260 years. So this was the power outlined in Bible prophecy, this Roman Catholic power. Now, this power is talked about in several other passages in the Bible. This isn't the one passage in the Bible. We're going to examine some more of those passages. Some of them were from your homework for tonight. And we're going to examine also this beast's end-time friend, this beast's cohort in the end times. All right? So some of the passages that talk about this end-time power are Daniel chapter 7 is what we talked about in our last night. The other ones are Daniel chapter 8, Daniel chapter 11, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. My power might have... No, here we go. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Revelation chapter 2. I think we might need to get a new clicker for me here. This is... Revelation chapter 2, Revelation chapter 13, and Revelation chapter 17. OJ's working on this. So these are the passages that are being talked about. This thing seems to have good power. I'm not sure what's going on. I mean, the laser works well. But these are the passages that talk about this power. In Daniel chapter 8, it's also referred to as a little horn. Daniel chapter 11, it's talked about as the king of the north some of the time. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, it's the man of sin or the son of perdition. Revelation 2, it's referred to as Jezebel. Revelation 13, we've already read this, talking about the beast. And Revelation 13 talks about a woman who's riding the beast. A woman who's riding the beast. So it's the same power talked about in all of those. Today, we're going to talk about these three of the ones. We're not going to talk about all of them, but we're going to talk about Daniel 8, 2 Thessalonians 2, and Revelation 13. That's what we're going to go through today. We're going to try to understand what's going on here. These three passages. So we're going to start in Daniel chapter 8. Now, Daniel chapter 8 runs very similar, somewhat parallel to Daniel 7 and Daniel 2. So we've already laid the framework. We've already got the skeleton, and we're just filling in pieces as we go. So Daniel chapter 8 starts off here. It says, "Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there standing beside the river was a ram, which had two horns. And the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last." Now, as you're reading Daniel 2 and you read this imagery, I've heard some very outlandish theories as to what this represents. I heard one pastor saying it represented the planes that are going to hit the World Trade Centers. or these are actually the World Trade Centers, the two horns, one's higher than the other, obviously World Trade Centers. And then later there's a goat that hits them. And this is what he said. But you just go to the last part of the chapter, and the angel Gabriel actually tells you what it means. So the angel Gabriel says, the ram which you saw having the two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. Pretty straightforward. The Medo-Persian Empire, which we've talked about before. The ram is the Medo-Persian Empire. The two horns, it says one is higher than the other, and the higher one comes up last. As we've talked about this before, the Persian Empire was stronger than the Medes, and they actually came up after the Medes. They worked together first. The Medes were coming along, then the Persians kind of worked with them, but then the Persians kind of overwhelmed them, and by the end, most historians just refer to it as the Persian Empire by the end. But this is what's going on. The Medo-Persian Empire, running parallel to the bear that we read about already. It's suddenly another beast, the second like a bear. It was raised up on one side. Same idea, raised up on one side. And it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. These were the 3 kingdoms it conquered. And if you go back to Daniel 8, verse 3, actually, it's verse 4, rather. In verse 4, it talks about the ram pushing in 3 directions, westward, northward, and southward. Talking about the 3 kingdoms that he conquered. The 3 kingdoms they conquered were in these directions. This is exactly what history tells us. You can just study the history books. These were the directions it went, and it conquered those same 3 kingdoms. It says, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand. But he did according to his will and became great. So we have this picture of this Medo-Persian ram becoming great, pushing in these 3 directions and doing according to his will. Then verse 5, and as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. So now we have this goat, and he's literally flying across the ground from the west. And he has this big horn between his eyes. Now, based on what we've studied in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, as we compared it with history, what power should this represent? Greece, right? This is the next one that came upon the scene. And that's exactly what the angel says. And the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. This is our fill in the blank here, the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. Does anyone remember who that first king is represented by this? Alexander the Great. Now, there were some other kings in Greece, but he was the first king when it rose to world prominence, when it rose to being a world power. This was Alexander the Great. And it's flying across the ground, the same idea as the 4 wings. This is swiftness, conquering in swiftness. Now, as we continue, then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. So this goat comes across the ram, and he comes at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. So essentially, the Greek Empire represented by the goat, the male goat, comes and conquers the ram and destroys the ram, just as Greece came and conquered the kingdom of Medo-Persia. Came and conquered the kingdom of Medo-Persia. Therefore, the male goat grew very great. But when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it, 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. So kind of an interesting thing. Once it's become strong, after it defeats its foe, when it's sitting there, the horn breaks, right? It doesn't break when it hits it, which is kind of the obvious thing. If you're just watching, a goat hitting a ram, when it hits, that would be when you would expect the horn to break. But that's not what happens. And that's not what happened in history. It was after Alexander the Great conquered Persia and conquered the then known world that he died. He died once he conquered everything. Then he dies. There's some debate about whether he was poisoned or whether he died from drinking too much among historians. Either way, he died once he was at the height of his power. And then it talks about it, there being 4 notable ones coming up toward the 4 winds of heaven. 4 winds of heaven are just the 4 directions of the compass. So 4 notable ones coming up in 4 different directions. Now, these are the same things we've already talked about before. The division of the Greek Empire after the death of Alexander the Great, to the 4 generals in the 4 different territories. And it actually interprets this. Gabriel comes along and he tells Daniel what's going on. He says, as for the broken horn and the 4 that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power. Straightforward. This is just reading it like you would a history book, okay? Now, verse 9. And out of one of them, that is out of one of the 4 directions of the compass, came a little horn which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. So now we have a little horn coming upon the scene. A little horn coming upon the scene. Verse 10. And it grew up to the host of heaven and cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. Verse 11, he even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Verse 12, because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. He did all this and prospered. Now, if we jump ahead to the interpretation given by Gabriel, it gives us some more information. Now, this time it doesn't tell us exactly what the kingdom will be. But it says, in the latter days of their kingdom, this is the division, latter days of the kingdom of that division, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. Now, this is actually an allusion back to Deuteronomy chapter 28. Deuteronomy 28 is one of the covenant curses. We talked about this on a previous night. But basically it says they're going to be carried captive and ultimately destroyed by this enemy nation. And this enemy nation, they say it's going to be a nation of fierce countenance, a nation of fierce countenance. And now this one is talking about a king and the actual literal translation of fierce countenance, a fierce countenance. So this is kind of a reference back to that. So it's not talking about necessarily a king, but a kingdom or a nation. Just as we've seen in the other prophecies of Daniel, how he uses king and kingdom kind of interchangeably. One time he'll say there's going to be 4 kings, and then he's like in the 4th kingdom. He's using kings representing their kingdom. So here we have this nation or this kingdom having fierce countenance, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. Through his cunning he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule, and he shall exalt himself in his heart, and he shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means. Without human means. Now this without human means, the literal Hebrew is without hand. Broken without hand. Now this runs parallel to in Daniel chapter 2. There's a stone. You remember how it was cut out? It was cut out without hand, which that signified the second coming. So this kingdom, this whatever this power is, shall be broken at the second coming. Be broken at the second coming. Okay? So this is what's going on. Now we're going to look back and look at kind of a few themes that are going throughout it, and we're going to pick out some highlights. Like we could spend many meetings just talking about Daniel chapter 8, but we're just going to pick out some highlights to talk about today. So first we're going to see, we saw the ram. This was Medo-Persia, and it became great, right? Became great. Then we see the male goat representing Greece, and it becomes very great, right? And then this little horn, it becomes exceedingly great. So we're seeing each of these is bigger and greater and more powerful than the last. So this isn't representing some little thing that's going to pop up for just a couple of years. This is representing something that rules for quite some time, something that is very powerful. It's representing the same figure as we were talking about before. Now, the little horn in this passage has 2 phases. It has 2 phases. It first has a horizontal phase, okay? It says, out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. It's going in 3 directions, south, east, and the glorious land. The glorious land was Israel. You can read that in various other parts of the Bible talking about the glorious land being Israel. So these are the directions it's growing. Horizontally, right? It's growing horizontally. But then, the next one is vertical. It grew up to the host of heaven and cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. Okay? So just as there was a Roman phase, because right after Greece comes Rome, so this would be the next thing that we'd be expecting to see on the phase. Just as there was a Roman phase where they were conquering the world, spreading amongst the world, and they actually went in the same directions as are talked about here, toward the south, toward the east, toward the glorious land. These were the directions that they conquered. And then after the Roman Empire fell, there arose this same power we were talking about, the Roman Catholic power. The Roman Catholic power that tried to usurp the ministry of Christ, tried to usurp the ministry of Christ, growing up to the host of heaven. This is the vertical phase where it's attacking God and not necessarily man. Okay? So this is kind of what's going on here. This is just, I'm giving you the outline, and then we're going to break it down a little more in detail. So many people ask, is the little horn the same as in Daniel 7? And I would say it definitely includes the same thing. It signifies a little more. It's just Rome in two different phases. But it's definitely includes the same power as Daniel chapter 7. And I've given you 11 reasons why it includes the same power. Okay? I'm just going to read through these things really fast. But this is what it is. Both are identified as the same symbol, a horn. Both are described as little at the outset. Both are described as becoming great later on. Both are described as persecuting powers. Both have the same target group as object of their persecution, the people of the saints. Both are described as self-exalting and blasphemous powers. Both are described as exercising crafty intelligence. Both represent the final and greatest anti-God climax of their visions. Both have aspects of their work delimited by prophetic time. This was the 1260 years of Daniel 7, and we're going to talk about the time prophecy of Daniel 8 at a later night. Number 10, the activities of both extend to the time of the end, and both are to be supernaturally destroyed. Both are to be supernaturally destroyed. So I just kind of ran through those things, and I know you probably didn't quite absorb it all. But the idea is it's the same power, okay? Does that make sense? All right. Same power being represented here. All right, so let's break down some of what's going on. So in verse 11, it says, he even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. All right? Now, this isn't what the literal Hebrew says. This is the New King James has to say on this. But if you look at the literal Hebrew, a literal translation runs like this. And I've read from a lot of different Hebrew scholars looking at this and studying this passage. And it runs something like this. It says, and he made himself great, even to the prince of the host. And from him, that is from the prince, was taken away the continuance. And the foundation of his sanctuary was thrown down. So it still sounds kind of ambiguous. Okay, what's going on, right? But we're going to try to break this down. So before we break this down, we have to understand who the prince of the host was, right? Because it's all about the prince of the host. It's this little horn power is doing all of this stuff against the prince of the host. Making himself as great as the prince of the host, trying to take away the continuance from the prince of the host, and trying to place throw down the sanctuary of the prince of the host. Okay? So it's all about the prince of the host. So who is the prince of the host? Now, if you look in the interpretation, it talks about him, he shall rise against the prince of princes. The prince of princes, right? Now, if you look in Daniel 10 and verse 13, it talks about Michael, one of the chief princes. The chief is kind of head of the princes, or you could maybe even say the prince of the princes, right? So this Michael must be the same as the prince of the host, right? And we already identified on a previous night who Michael was. And who's Michael? Michael's Jesus, right? So the prince of the host is Michael, is Jesus. All right, so let's put this back into what we're looking at. Little translation, we have, and he made himself great even to Jesus. So he's basically trying to take the position of Jesus. And from Jesus was taken away the continuance. He's trying to take away the continuance from Jesus, whatever this continuance is, or what Jesus is continually doing. You could say that, okay? And the foundation of Jesus' sanctuary was thrown down. So he's trying to throw down the sanctuary of Jesus, okay? So now we need to figure out what those are talking about. First of all, we got to figure out what the sanctuary of Jesus is, and then what that being thrown down means. All right? So in Psalms 11, verse 4, it says, the Lord is in his holy temple, the Lord's throne is in heaven. Talking about his temple is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids test the sons of men. All right? So we've already talked about this before, but God has a heavenly temple, a heavenly sanctuary. Okay? Hebrews chapter 8, verses 1 and 2. Now this is the main point of the things we are saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle, which the Lord erected and not man. Again, talking about the sanctuary in the heavens. So if he's throwing down this foundation of the sanctuary, he's trying to take the ministry that should be happening in heaven and putting it on earth. Okay? Is that making sense? Are you guys with me? Okay. And Hebrews 7, verse 25 tells us what Jesus does in this heavenly sanctuary continually. Therefore, he is also able to save to the uttermost those who come to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. Jesus is always making intercession for them. So when this little horn power is trying to take away what Jesus is continually doing, he's trying to take away Jesus interceding for his people. Jesus interceding. So he's trying to take the place of the sanctuary and place it on the earth. So he's trying to take the intercession of Jesus and put it through a man. Okay? So this power tries to usurp the heavenly ministry of Christ. To usurp the heavenly ministry of Christ. All right? Now, we've already identified who this power is. This is the Roman Catholic power. And I could read a bunch of quotes. We'll read a few, but you don't even have to read those to kind of get an idea of this. You go to a priest and you go to confessional, right? So you confess your sins to a priest and not to God, right? So right there he's trying to usurp the ministry of Christ, trying to be the one who intercedes between God and man, right? And that's only for Jesus. That is only Jesus. But we'll read a few here. Now this is from the Complete Catechism of the Catholic Religion. It says, does the priest truly forgive the sins, or does he only declare that they are remitted? So basically the question is, does the priest forgive them, or does he just declare that God forgave them, right? The answer, the priest does really and truly forgive the sins in virtue of the power given to him by Christ. So they're saying that he's actually the one forgiving them. He's taking the place of Christ. Now, as we look here, we could read many more quotes on that, but this should do us for now. If we look in verse 24, it says, his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. Therefore, there's going to be a powerful, mighty kingdom, but not by his own power. We talked about this a little bit last night, how he'd be a controlling power who control other powers. We can read this here. Pope Clement V talking to Edward II, King of England. This is recorded in The Age of Faith, Story of Civilization by Will Durant. He says, we hear that you forbid torture as contrary to the laws of your land, but no state law can override the church's canon law, our law. Therefore, I command you at once to submit these men to torture. Okay? Essentially what's going on is this England forbids torture, right? They forbid torture. But then the Pope talks to them and is like, hey, you have to torture these guys because I said so. Because I'm in charge of you. And if you look at history, they did. Okay? They followed their lead here. Okay? Now, because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and he prospered. Now, we could look at a lot of ways that this power casts truth to the ground. A lot of the false teachings that were put out by this power, a lot of the truth that was cast down to the ground. But ultimately, the truth is the Bible. The truth is the Bible. You can see that in John chapter 17, verse 17. We're not going to go there right now, but Jesus is praying to the Father, and he's sanctify them by thy truth. Thy word is truth. Okay? Now, it's true that the Catholic Church voted on and chose the canon of the Bible, right? Now, the Bible, God was guiding in the preservation of the Bible, and there was already Christians keeping that. So we're not saying that the Catholic Church just picked this out at random. But they did kind of make it a code, and they kind of preserved it in the language that the language that people couldn't read. But they took it out of the reach of the common person. They only had it in the language that only like the priests could read. Only like the priests could read. We're going to read a few quotes from this. This is from Fox's Book of Martyrs, right?
Now it says the principal accusation against those who are subject to this tribunal is heresy. So basically they have this tribunal and they have heresy. They're quoting a Catholic person here. It says, which compromises all that is spoken or written against any of the articles of the creed. So they're talking about what is heresy. All that is spoken or written against any of the articles of the creed or the traditions of the Roman Church. The Inquisition likewise takes cognizance of such as are accused of being magicians and of such who read the Bible in the common language. All right? So these are people who can't read Latin, who can't read all the language that it was in, but they could read the common language, and they say, no, you can't read it in the common language. And then they also talk about the Talmud of the Jews and the Al-Quran of the Mohammedans. All right? So they outlawed the Bible in the common language. All right? Now this is in the History of Protestantism, Volume 3, 374. Set the context. Tyndale had just translated the Bible, and he's passing it out. So this is what's going on. It says, the chagrin and irritation of the bishops were extreme. An archiepiscopal mandate was issued in the end of 1526 against the Bible or any book containing so much as one quotation from it. So he translated it into the common language, and they're like, no, you can't use this one in the common language. Now, then he starts selling them. Well, they decide they're going to get smart, and they're going to buy them all up, and then they're going to burn them. This is basically what it says, right? So it says the price was paid to Tyndale. The New Testaments were sent across to London, and soon after their arrival were publicly burned at St. Paul's Cross. Now, if you read the rest of the story, it's actually a pretty cool story. Tyndale was smart. He figured out what they were doing, and he charges them way more than he cost to make them, right? So then he takes that money, and he makes more Bibles, and he gives them out for free. So they're actually funding him giving out the Bibles, but they finally figured out what he was doing and they stopped that. But it's a pretty cool story. But yeah, they were burning these Bibles, right? All right, so let's shift. We could spend our whole time in Daniel chapter 8, but let's shift over here to 2 Thessalonians 2. First, we're going to read through it, then we're going to pick out some highlights. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 1. Now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, we ask you not to be soon shaken in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as though the day of Christ had come. Okay? So in the first letter to the Thessalonians, first letter to Thessalonica, Paul is talking about the second coming. You know, 4 verse 16, the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Right? He's talking about the second coming. Well, then apparently word started getting around that the second of Christ either was just about to happen, like as in on Tuesday, like we talk about the second coming, but we still think, a bit in the future. These people were like, it's maybe tomorrow, right? But then some people were even talking about that Christ had already come, had come, right? They were talking about some spiritual sense, or maybe he's just coming and walking the earth, all kinds of stuff. There's a bunch of stuff going around. And he says, no, I want to make something clear here, right? Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day, that is the day of the second coming, will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition. So he's like, the second coming isn't going to happen until this other guy shows up, the man of sin and the son of perdition. All right, so first let's talk about these two phrases, man of sin and son of perdition. Now, the son of perdition is only applied to two people in the Bible. This power here in this passage, and then it's applied to Judas Iscariot, the son of perdition, right? Now, this kind of again gives us that idea of being a subtle betrayer of Christ instead of a strong opposer, right? That's what Judas was. He was one of Jesus' disciples throughout this time, and then he kind of falls away. You could have the falling away here, and then he betrays the Son of Man with a kiss, right? This is kind of what we're doing, kind of a subtle betrayal, a subtle imposture, right? Now, this falling away, let's talk about the falling away. This is the Greek word apostasia, and I'm sure most of you have already figured out what word that typically is translated as, apostasy, right? So where we get the word apostasy. Now, the same root is also translated as divorce, right? So this kind of has the same idea. You can't divorce someone who you weren't married to, right? Yeah, you can't do that. right? So this is the same idea. This is a group that comes from God's own church, a group that comes from God's own church that apostatizes, that falls away, and becomes known as the son of perdition or the man of sin, right? Who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. This kind of reminds me of Isaiah chapter 14, when we're talking about about Lucifer. He says, "I will be like the Most High." This is kind of the same idea, working under the commands and the leading of Lucifer, right? And now you know what is restraining, that he may be revealed in his own time. So it's talking about a restraining power. It says, "For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way." So basically the roots of this apostasy are already there. There's already kind of the roots of it that will grow. But there's some power that is restraining and will be taken out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming. Okay? So we're going to do like we did with Daniel 7. We're going to look at 6 observations. We're going to then change them into like 6 clues once we compare them with history and the rest of the Bible. And we're just going to see what this is, right? So the falling away or apostasy comes before the second coming. Pretty straightforward. It says, "For that day will not come unless the falling away comes first." Number 2, it is already beginning its work in Paul's day. And it says this right here, "For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work." Number 3, the man of sin will be revealed. It says this a couple times, the man of sin is revealed, and then the lawless one will be revealed. So it's still a future from Paul. The root's already there, but its actual consummation, it won't be a full power until the future from Paul. Number 4, in Paul's day, there is one who restrains, who is preventing the full development of the mystery of lawlessness. We see this here, "For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way." Number 5, the man of sin will sit in the temple of God, claiming to be God. We read that here. So that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And number 6, the man of sin will live until the second coming, at which point he will be destroyed by its brightness. All right, now let's see if we can convert these into 6 clues to kind of understand what's going on by comparing it to history and the rest of Scripture, right? So the falling away or apostasy comes before the second coming. This one's pretty straightforward, right? It says there will be a group that comes from God's own church. They apostatize at some point before the second coming. So right now we just have a time frame. It's going to be before the second coming, right? Now, number 2, it's already beginning its work in Paul's day. So it's already begun its work in the days of Paul. This one, again, is really straightforward to figure out. The spirit of the Antichrist is already at work in 60 AD, but the power has not been publicly revealed. It hasn't been publicly revealed. It's just kind of the roots, the growth, all right? Now, number 3, the man of sin will be revealed in the future. At some point after Paul's time, after about 60, the man of sin will be revealed. These are pretty straightforward. Number 4, in Paul's day, there is one who restrains, who is preventing the full development of the mystery of lawlessness. This is pretty straightforward again, not too complicated, that there is a power in Paul's day that God is using to hold back the power of the man of sin. The power of the man of sin. Okay? Number 5, the man of sin will sit in the temple of God claiming to be God. Now, this one's going to take us a little more time. We've got to look at some other passages in the Bible. Now, we already talked about the temple of God being the heavenly sanctuary. However, this is very clearly an earthly power, a person, right? So they're not going to get in a rocket and fly up to the heavenly sanctuary, okay? So this must refer to something else, okay? So we have to see how else the temple of God is used in the writings of Paul. We'll see this a few passages. Here's the passage talking about it. All right, so 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 16. "Do you not know that you are the temple of God?" He's writing to the church at Corinth, "and that the Spirit of God dwells in you," and specifically to a lot of the people, but at the people specifically and more corporately the church. Okay? "If anyone defiles the temple of God, God will destroy him, for the temple of God is holy, which temple you are." We see this again in 2 Corinthians 6 and verse 16. And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall be my people. So this is very clearly talking about the temple being both the individuals as well as the church. Now, Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 19 starts out, now therefore you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone. So it's talking about this church at Ephesus as being this conglomeration, this group of, and they're built on the foundation of the prophets with Jesus Christ being the chief cornerstone. So we're already talking about kind of building imagery, right? Then it says, in whom the whole building, being joined together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together for a dwelling place of God in the Spirit. So the temple of God in the writings of Paul is used very many times to refer to the church, So here we have the man of sin will be in the church of God claiming to be God. The church of God claiming to be God. Number 6, the man of sin will live until the second coming, at which point he will be destroyed by its brightness. And this power will be an enemy of God and his people until the second coming, when it will be destroyed. All right, so we're just going to go back through these, and we're going to see how this power that we've already identified as the Roman Catholic power fits these identifying marks. We won't take too much time here. A lot of this kind of overlaps with what we've covered before. It won't take us too long. This will be a group that comes from God's own church at some point before the second coming. We saw that the Catholic Church was an apostate movement from within the Church of God. The Catholic Church was an apostate movement that rejected the guidance of God. Okay? Number 2, the spirit of Antichrist is already at work in 60 AD, but the power has not been publicly revealed. So the public revealing hasn't happened in Paul's day, but some of the underlying themes were already at work. Okay? And this is pretty straightforward. The church did not gain full power until 530 AD, but the roots were already there. You can see some of this, not much of it, but you see some of this in the early church as you're reading through Acts, some of these situations going on. Number 3, at some point after Paul's time, the man of sin would be revealed, where I talked about this. In 538, it gained full power. This was considerably after Paul's time. Number 4, there's a power in Paul's day that God is using to hold back the power of the man of sin. Okay? Now, the Catholic Church couldn't rise to power until the Roman Empire was out of the way. Right? The Roman Empire was this world power ruling the world, and it wasn't until it fell that there was this vacuum of power that this new power could arise. So this must be the power that is restraining the man of sin. Okay? Now the man of sin will be in the church of God claiming to be God. The man of sin will be in the church of God claiming to be God. And we're going to read a few quotes here. Now this is in Lucius Ferrerus Prompta Bibliotheca, and I'm not going to read the rest of that. It's in Latin. Now, according to the modern Catholic encyclopedia, they say this was a veritable encyclopedia of religious knowledge. Right? He was one of a very, very strong theologian in the medieval church, and this is some of what he wrote. We're just going to read a few of these. I have on the top it in Latin for some of these. Some of them I didn't put it in. And down here is the translation. So it says, the Pope is of so great dignity and highness to be no mere man, but as it were God and the vicar of God. As it were God and the vicar of God. Very clearly having the Pope in the church claiming to be God. Moreover, the superiority and the power of the Roman pontiff by no means pertains only to heavenly things. So the context here is talking about that he's in charge of heavenly things. But he's like, not just heavenly things, right? He's also over earthly things, and to the things under the earth, and even over the angels whom he is greater than. So essentially what they're saying is this Roman pontiff is over heaven, over earth, and they talk about things under the earth. They're referring to hell or purgatory. right? When they talk about this. So basically, over everything, over the angels, right? This is the position that God himself should hold. Okay? And just have one more quote from them on page 27. As to papal authority, the Pope is, as it were, God on earth, sole sovereign of all the faithful of Christ, chief King of kings, having a plenitude of unbroken power, entrusted by the omnipotent God to govern the earthly and the heavenly kingdoms. The Pope is, as it were, God on earth. This is very clearly the Pope claiming to hold the position of God. Claiming to hold the position of God. Now, number 6, this power will be an enemy of God and his people until the second coming, when it will be destroyed. This is pretty straightforward. This power is still going to exist until the second coming. Until the second coming, when it will be destroyed. Now let's move to Revelation 13. We're just going to get the highlights. Most of Revelation 13 we've already kind of covered in the other passages, so we don't have a lot of unique stuff, but we're going to try to tell the story of that, and then we're going to talk about the beast's end-time partner, the beast's end-time partner in crime. Okay? It says, Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. As we already saw, the dragon is none other than the devil and Satan. He gets his power and authority from the devil. And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And he was given authority to continue for 42 months. We already talked about these 42 months equal 1,260 days. 1,260 days, 30 days per month. And this takes you from 538 until 1798. And then after that, it mentions in the passage, it says, I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded. After the 1,260 years, it receives a mortal wound, a deadly wound. And his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. We see this power has 2 phases. It has a phase over the 1,260 years while it's in power. Then it receives a mortal wound. But then it has a last day phase where it arises back to power and all the world follows the beast. All the world follows the beast. Now as we continue, it talks about this beast for quite some time. We can get quite a bit more information out of this, but we don't have time to tonight. It ends, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. And then verse 10, he who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Here we have an allusion back to the deadly wound with the sword, the deadly wound that was given, and the going into captivity. We already talked about the historical ramifications of this, how the Pope was taken captive. The Pope was taken captive. And it's alluding back to this time where the Pope was taken captive just before it introduces a new power, telling us the time frame of the rising of this new power. Now we have a new power being introduced, this last day power. Revelation 13 verse 11 says, Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. And he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. So around this time we have this new beast coming up. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. We have this new power arising onto the scene who's working with the first beast and he's causing the world to worship the first beast. Now we can make 6 observations about this second beast of Revelation 13. 6 observations. We're going to go through them rather quickly here, but we're going to outline them here. All right, so this we've already talked about what beasts are, so I'm not going to even deal with trying to interpret what the beast is. We have it right here. This nation or kingdom emerges to world prominence around the time the first beast receives its deadly wound. So about the time the first beast is going down, we have this new beast coming up. All right? Now, Number 2, this kingdom or nation arises from the earth and not the sea. We notice this here. He sees another beast coming up out of the earth. Another beast coming up out of the earth. Number 3, this beast has 2 horns that are likened unto a lamb. 2 horns like a lamb. We see this here. He had 2 horns like a lamb. Number 4, this beast speaks like a dragon. You see here, and he spoke like a dragon. This beast spoke like a dragon. Now this beast has no crowns. We see the other beasts have crowns, including the dragon of Revelation 12, and another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. He had crowns. The first beast also has crowns. On his horns, 10 crowns. He looks very much like the dragon as well, 7 heads and 10 horns. But now he has 10 horns and he has 10 crowns instead of 7 crowns. All right. But here we come to the last one. It does not have a crown. And number 6, we see that it is a worldwide military and economic power. Worldwide military and economic power. Now you have this. This is our fill in the blank word here. Worldwide. Now, how do we see that? Now, in Revelation 13, verses 16, it says, He causes all, both small and great, this is talking about the second beast, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. Any power that can cause everyone to receive a mark has to have quite a bit of power, right? Has to have some sort of worldwide influence, some sort of worldwide military power. And then notice it's also economic, that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So there's a worldwide economic and military power. All right? Now let's look at these observations and look at history as well as the rest of the Bible and see if we can convert these into clues as to the identity of this beast. Okay? This nation or kingdom emerges to world prominence around the time the first beast receives its deadly wound. We've already talked about when it received its deadly wound. So it rise to prominence around 1798. Pretty straightforward. 1798. Number 2, this kingdom or nation arises from the earth, not the sea. From the earth and not the sea. Now, if we look in Revelation, we see what the seas represent, what the waters represent. You see this in Revelation 17 and verse 15. It says, The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So waters are populated areas. So lack of waters, the earth must mean kind of an unpopulated area. But I would argue it means a little more than that. Let's examine Revelation 12. Revelation 12 kind of gives us the key to understanding what this earth means. Okay? Now, Revelation 12 and verse 14, it says, But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So this is the 1,260 years we've already talked about. She goes into the wilderness. She's being persecuted. The serpent's chasing her. She's being persecuted for these 1,260 years. And then it continues. During this time, and actually more towards the end of this time, it continues. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. So he sends this water after the woman, this flood after the woman, to carry her away. And then verse 16 tells us, But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Okay? So if this water is this forces of persecution, these peoples, if you will, but persecution coming from the beast, from the dragon after this woman, and then there's this area, this relatively unpopulated area that saves the woman from this persecution. This relatively unpopulated area that saves the woman from this persecution. Now, historically speaking, there's one area that fits that exactly, okay? You can look at this many places. I quoted it from Wikipedia here. You can quote this from many places. It says, Many of the British North American colonies that eventually formed the United States of America were settled in the 17th century by men and women who, in the face of European religious persecution, refused to compromise passionately held religious convictions and fled Europe. So essentially there's these people who are being persecuted for their religion, and they flee into the Americas. Okay, remember the Pilgrims, Plymouth Rock, all that stuff? They flee into the Americas to escape this religious persecution. Okay? So this nation would rise out of a relatively unpopulated area, perhaps even in the Americas. Number 3, this beast had 2 horns that are likened unto a lamb, right? Now, we see this, the 2 horns like a lamb. Now, this lamb occurs 29 times in the book of Revelation, the word lamb. 28 of those times, this is the one exception, it clearly refers to Christ. Clearly refers to Christ. You have the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. You have the lamb with 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God, that appears as though it had been slain. You have all of these lambs representing Christ. But here we have this lamb this creature with horns like a lamb that is not like Christ. That is not like Christ. Now, what do the horns represent? Now, horns generally, we're just going to go through a few passages in the Bible that we looked at last night, as well as a couple others. What do horns represent? This is one we looked at last night. His glory is like a firstborn bull, and his horns like the horns of the wild ox. Horns kind of representing strength and power of this kingdom. Okay, 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 1, and Hannah prayed and said, my heart rejoices in the Lord, my horn is exalted in the Lord. And the horn is exalted. It's a sign of strength and exaltation. 2 in verse 10, she ends this prayer, he will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Kind of paralleling the giving strength and exalting his horn. So the horn is kind of is again symbolizing strength and exaltation. Now in the prophecies of Daniel, the horns represent kings or kingdoms. The 10 horns are 10 kings. And this also, we see this in Revelation 13 verse 1. It's the same 10 horns going on here. But you'll notice these horns have 10 crowns. These horns have 10 crowns. So these are a little different than the horns on the lamb. Okay? So if we're talking about kingdoms, right? But they're likened unto Christ, okay? So they're horns like a lamb. They're not just any old horns. These are horns like a lamb. So we need to see what Jesus said about what his views were on kingdoms, on the division of kingdoms. Now if you look in we see this one doesn't have the horns. Now, if you look in Luke 20, verse 25, it says, and he said to them, render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Now, we could look at many verses about this, but Jesus basically recognized 2 kingdoms, the kingdom of earth and the kingdom of heaven, right? He talks about many of his prophecies, the kingdom of heaven is like, the kingdom of heaven is like, the kingdom of heaven is like. But he also talks about keeping the laws of the land, like rendering to Caesar, therefore, the things that are Caesar's. Jesus recognized these 2 kingdoms, the kingdom of earth and the kingdom of heaven. So this nation would have Christ-like attributes, perhaps even recognizing the earthly kingdom and the heavenly kingdom, or the spiritual kingdom. Okay? So I have Christ-like attributes, and this is a possible way that these Christ-like attributes could be manifest. Okay? Number 4, this beast would speak like a dragon, and we already looked at who the dragon is, the devil and Satan. So when it's speaking like a dragon, it says this nation would appear like Christ, but would behave in some ways like Satan. And number 5, this beast has no crowns. We've already looked at the crowns are signifying these kingly kingdoms, the kings representing their kingdoms, but this one doesn't have crowns. Therefore, this nation must not have a king, or in other words, be a democracy. All right? And number 6, it would be a worldwide military and economic power. This one doesn't really need any further explanation. It's pretty straightforward, right? So let's review what we've covered, and then we're going to try to identify what this power is. This nation would rise to prominence around 1798. This nation would rise out of a relatively unpopulated area, perhaps even in the Americas. The nation would have Christ-like attributes, perhaps even recognizing an earthly kingdom and a spiritual kingdom. This nation would appear like Christ, but would behave in some ways like Satan. Number 5, this nation has no king. In other words, it is a democracy. And number 6, it is a worldwide military and economic power. Now, many of you probably already figured out what this power is. There's really only one power that fits all of these. And you really only need, number 1, to tell what it is, right? There's only one major nation that rises to world prominence around 1798. This nation is none other than the United States of America. Okay? It fits. We're going to go through each of these, and we're going to see how they fit, okay? But before we go into these, I'd just like to say, I am proud to be an American, right? We will talk about some of the bad things that are coming. The Bible prophesies bad things that are coming, but it also talks about some of the good things that have happened. It talks about these Christ-like attributes. All right, so the Founding Fathers, I believe, were in many ways led by God in the way they set up this country. But the devil has been trying to change that ever since, okay? And we'll see in the last days that this kingdom, this nation, will be used not by God, but by the devil. Okay? So this nation would rise to prominence around 1798. These are some of the dates. I didn't cite anything here because you can get this from pretty much anywhere. 1776, the United States declares its independence. 77, the Articles of Confederation. 83, the Revolutionary War ends. 87, the United States Constitution. 89, the United States Constitution is ratified. And 91, the Bill of Rights is adopted. You see this rising to power just prior to 1798, right around 1798. Number 2, this nation would rise out of a relatively unpopulated area, perhaps even in the Americas. Well, this is pretty straightforward. It's the United States of America, right? They came over in this relatively unpopulated area. Yes, there were people here. There were the Indians here. But it was a relatively unpopulated area, not nearly as much population as there currently is. That's pretty straightforward. This nation has Christ-like attributes, perhaps even recognizing the earthly kingdom and the spiritual kingdom. So we're going to quote a few things here. This is from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All right? That we have this freedom. People can choose what they want. And this is kind of how God is, how Christ is. He gives us the freedom of choice, right? You have the option. You can choose what you want. I've heard it said that in America you have the greatest right of all, the right to be wrong. The right to be wrong. Okay? So that's basically what it says. You know, you could set up a, like, notice this one. In the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Basically, you can choose to worship whatever you want in this country. And you should be allowed to do that. According to our founding fathers, I could choose to worship this speaker system here. And, they'd allow me to do that. That'd be a pretty stupid thing to do. But, you could do that and they would allow you to do that. Or that is how this nation was founded. It was founded on two principles of freedom. Civil liberty and religious liberty. Civil liberty and religious liberty. Kind of the recognizing the kingdom of God, that the kingdom of God can take care of itself, kind of, so you have liberty to choose what you want in the spiritual realm, and in civil liberty. Civil liberty. You could also talk about this as they came to this nation to kind of escape a king and escape a pope. Escape a king and escape a pope. Okay? This nation would appear like Christ, but would behave in some ways like Satan. Behave in some ways like Satan. This has to do, with the final crisis, how they will be behaving like Satan, speaking like Satan. We're going to talk about that a little bit more tonight, and more as we develop this thought throughout the series. But our historic freedoms, these freedoms where we could worship this speaker system or that plant, these freedoms of religion and civil freedoms are going to be challenged. This is what the Bible says, and many of us who are watching the newspapers can see this happening around us. Okay? Now, this nation has no king. In other words, it is a democracy. Now, this is pretty straightforward. We elected a new president just a year ago, less than a year ago, something like that. We elected a new president. So it was less than a year ago, considerably less. We elected a new president. So this was a democracy. This isn't a king. This isn't a dictatorship. Number 6, it is a worldwide military and economic power. Now, this is, there's books on this. There's all kinds of stuff on this. I'm just going to read you a couple of quotes, just kind of hit it home, but this is pretty straightforward. According to Wikipedia, the United States is a developed country and has the world's largest national economy, with an estimated 2012 gross domestic product of $15.6 trillion. really big. The world's largest national economy. It's a worldwide economic power. Now, about the worldwide military part, this is also according to Wikipedia. It says the total U.S. military spending in 2011, more than $700 billion, was 40% of the global military spending. So basically, of all of the countries of the world spending on military, we spent 41% of that, okay? And we're a very small percentage of the population, but we spend a lot of that. And notice this, and equal to the next 14 largest national military expenditures combined. That's just like, whoa, like add up the next 14 and it's the same as the largest one. The United States is a worldwide military and economic power. Worldwide military and economic power, okay? So let's review these. All right, the nation would rise to prominence around 1798. It did. The nation would rise out of a relatively unpopulated area, perhaps even in the Americas. It did. This nation has Christ-like attributes, perhaps even recognizing the earthly kingdom and the spiritual kingdom. This nation would appear like Christ, would behave in some ways like Satan. This nation has no king. In other words, it is a democracy. And number 6 is a worldwide military and economic power. Okay, most of these are very straightforward. You don't even have to look up in books how most of these take place. It's a democracy. It's a worldwide power. You know that. You know when it arose. You know where it came up. And you know the Constitution and what it signifies. It's really number 4 that we really need to talk about now. How it's going to be behaving like Satan. How it's going to be behaving like Satan. Now, how have the United States and the Catholic Church been working together? Because we read here, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. So he's working very closely with the first beast, So now, the great final crisis is still in the future. Now, it's not very far in the future, I would argue. But right now, we can actually see the pieces being laid in place. We can see how they're starting to work together, how things are starting to work together. I'm just going to show you really briefly how that's the case. Now, this is the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court and their affiliations, right? There are 9 people on the Supreme Court. 6 of them are Catholics. 3 of them are Jewish. There isn't a Protestant on there. It's stacked. The Supreme Court is stacked. We're going to read a quote a little bit later that basically says the Constitution is whatever the Supreme Court says it is. Basically, they can control how laws are interpreted. Now, if you look at the percentage of the United States as Catholic is about 24%, but the percentage in the Supreme Court is 66.7% or 66.6 into infinity percent, right? This is 2/3, right? Much larger than the national percentage, right? Now, in the national percentage, there's about 51 that are Protestant, about 51%. So about half of the United States identifies as Protestant. Now, shown here is a map of the governors, right? The governors of the United States and their religious affiliation. The red are the Roman Catholic, okay? And then the other colors are, some of them are Protestant, some of them are Jewish, some of them are other, agnostic, atheist, something else. And you see that a very large percentage are Roman Catholic, much higher than the population, than the percentage in the population again. A very strong, they're in ruling power. The places are, the pieces are being put in place. Now, how has the United States spoken as a dragon? How has this happened? Now, this is the quote I mentioned earlier, Charles Evans Hughes, the Chief Justice from 1930 to 1941, says the Constitution is what the Supreme Court says it is. Essentially, they can interpret it however they want. That's kind of scary, especially when we've looked at the numbers on the Supreme Court. Now, this is an example of how this works. In the Minersville School District versus Gobitis in 1941, the Supreme Court ruled that children must salute the flag, even Jehovah's Witnesses that believe it to be idolatry. Okay? So they believe it's idolatry to salute the flag. I don't agree with that. But that should be protected under their constitutional rights. Freedom of religion, that they shouldn't be required to salute the flag. But they were required to salute the flag. This is taking away the religious freedoms, Now, 3 years later, they reversed it. The Supreme Court made both decisions, and they just went whichever way they chose to go. Okay? This is just really hitting home that idea that the Supreme Court can interpret the Constitution however they choose. Okay? Now, during World War II, 70,000 Japanese Americans were forced into relocation centers regardless of their citizenship. Okay? Their freedoms were being taken away. They were forced. They were like, maybe they're going to be loyal to Japan. Take them away. They were citizens of the United States, and they were taken away into these relocation centers because they might pose a threat to everyone else. Now, listen to this quote. Now, this comes from a tome, The American Constitution, by Kelly and Harbison. This is on page 841, so you see it's quite a large book. It says, in future wars, no person belonging to a racial, religious, cultural, or political minority can be assured that community prejudice and bigotry will not express itself in a program of suppression justified as military necessity, with resulting destruction of his basic rights as a member of a free society. Now, just basically, that's pretty wordy. Basically, what it's saying is, for the good of the nation, a military necessity, they can take away your rights. Okay? No minority, whether it's religious, cultural, political, whatever, is guaranteed their rights if there's a military necessity. We see this today. Ever since 9/11, with the whole, people have been just giving away their freedoms. They've been saying they want safety over freedom. And we see the Patriot Act, as well as many strengthening of that and progression of that under Obama, which basically says that if you're suspected as a terrorist, you have no rights. And that's a scary thing, because they don't have to provide proof that you're suspected of a terrorist. It's just as somebody suspecting you, right? The freedoms are being challenged. Now, the question is, what will be the central issue in the persecution? Because clearly there's going to be a persecution by the United States in behalf of this beast power. Now, what will be the central issue, and what will be the mark of the beast that all are going to be caused to have? What is this mark of the beast, and what is this central issue? Now, you're going to have to come back to hear what that is, okay? We're not going to deal with that tonight. So got to keep you guys hooked. Got to keep you coming back here. But I just want to really hit home what's going on here. Essentially, the laws of the land are going to tell you to do one thing, and God's going to tell you to do something else. Okay? Now, the rest of the book of Revelation refers to this beast from the land, as the false prophet. And in Revelation 16, which we're going to study when we get there, in Revelation 16 it refers to it alludes back to the time on Mount Carmel. The time on Mount Carmel where there was the false prophets against the prophet Elijah. There was this conflict over worship, and everyone had to decide that day who they would choose. Would they serve God, or would they serve Baal? Pointed to by the false prophets. And this is what's going to come for us today. Before you even find out what the central issue is, you need to make up your mind who you want to serve. Do you want to serve God, or do you want to serve man? Okay? So if you want to serve God, I'd ask you to just raise your hand with me right now. All right, we want to serve God in the last days. All right, let's kneel as far as possible for prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for giving us your word. We wouldn't know anything about you without your word. Anything about you without what you have revealed to us, what you have chosen to reveal to us. And right now we thank you for revealing to us what the future holds. Now, it's a scary thing. There's bad things that are on the horizon, but we know that you will sustain us through them. And you saw the hands going up, and you know the hearts of the people here who want to just say, I'm going to serve you. We want to serve you, Lord. You're amazing, you're awesome, and we know that whatever the trials that come, whatever the difficulties that come, whatever the persecutions that come, we know that if we serve you, it will be better in the end. So right now, we just want to stay loyal to you. We want to echo what the three Hebrews said in the fiery furnace, that our God is able to deliver us, but even if He chooses not to, we're still going to serve Him. So right now, we're just saying we really want to serve you, God. We want to serve you in this time of final crisis that's coming on us soon. Just be with us now and guide us and remind us of these decisions that we've made today. And guide us and keep us strong for this final crisis. Be with us in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so just a reminder, our next meeting is on Wednesday. And my friend Angela Grasso is going to be talking to you about Wednesday night's meeting, and I think he might have some homework for you on Wednesday. So he's going to be doing the one on Wednesday, and come on up, Angela. We'll tell him what's going on.
Good evening, everybody. So on Wednesday, we're going to have the big reveal on the mark of the beast. So the homework is to continue reading Revelation 13, spend some time in Revelation 13, 11 through the end of the chapter, and then look at Revelation 14, 6 through 12. So we'll be spending some time on the mark of the beast, also the seal of God, and the everlasting gospel. So we look forward to seeing you back here on Wednesday. Thank you.